Week 9 delivered some surprise performances, and then Tuesday's trading deadline changed a lot of those situations around the league. So, what does it all mean for your Week 10 waiver wire run and your roster management for the rest of the season? Well, we're going to start sorting all that out on an all new Draft Sharks podcast right now. Schauf and Jared Smola of DraftSharks.com here to help you get set for your Week 10 waiver wire run. We are recording this on Tuesday afternoon following a flurry of trades, much busier than the usual NFL trade deadline. We're going to assess more of those altered situations on our preview podcast for Week 10 later this week, but a couple of those situations are going to come up here. First, though, Jared, let's start by hitting the Green Bay offense, which had some key changes, not related to the trade deadline. It started with, well, it didn't start with it, but the biggest one is losing tight end Tucker Kraft to an ACL tear on Sunday. They also watched Matthew Golden suffer a shoulder injury in that game. Dontavian Wicks already dealing with a calf injury. Of course, before that, we had Christian Watson come back from last year's ACL tear. So all of it now puts both Watson and Luke Musgrave in the spotlight for waivers. First off, which of those two Packers are you more interested in as we head into waivers for Week 10?
Musgrave for me. I just think the position he plays, it's going to be easier for him to become a fantasy factor. I have my doubts about Christian Watson. He's doing Christian Watson stuff so far. He has 8 targets on an 11% target share through 2 games. He has a 23.1 yard average depth of target. He's caught 6 of his 8 targets, so he's been much more efficient than he usually is on those deep balls. You look at his first 3 years, 57% catch rate, 16.9 yards per catch. So he's going to make those big plays, but this catch rate's not going to sustain on this type of usage. The Matthew Golden injury doesn't sound serious. Jaden Reed's going to be back soon, so there's obviously opportunity here with the Kraft injury, a lot of opportunity, especially inside the red zone. I think that's where Watson is could be most impactful, is taking some of those red zone and end zone targets that Kraft was getting. But I'm still skeptical that he's going to be a reliable fantasy play for us on a weekly basis.
I totally agree. I think Christian Watson's worth stashing just in case he gets more regular usage than what we're expecting. But this is still an offense that would like to run the ball a bit more than we would want it to for fantasy purposes. And Christian Watson's just been the type of player that's likely to present more value for his real life team than for our fantasy teams, just because he doesn't get the high weekly target volume. He's in an offense that's probably at its best spreading things around. So I agree. I think Luke Musgrave is much closer to a role, and especially at his position where we don't need as many targets each week, he's much closer, I think, to fantasy relevance, to a spot that could be in our lineups at least most weeks, if not, close to like an every week player the rest of the way.
Yeah, to me, the argument in favor of Musgrave is that he could be a good player, right? I mean, he was the 42nd overall pick of the 2023 draft, had a nice rookie season until he got hurt. He caught 34 balls in 11 games as a rookie, gets hurt at the end of that rookie season, and then basically just loses his job to Tucker Kraft, which you can't blame the guy because Tucker Kraft's a top 3 tight end in the NFL. So Musgrave, I think, again, he could be good. He's in this efficient passing game, even though it's low volume, it's been an efficient passing game. The argument against Luke Musgrave is that even Tucker Kraft was sitting 12th among tight ends in expected PPR points per game prior to this past week. And I don't think Luke Musgrave's even going to garner as much volume, as much opportunity as Tucker Kraft did. So you're probably talking about someone who's going to be outside the top 12 at the position in terms of opportunity. So you're going to need efficiency. You're going to need good touchdown luck for him to be a weekly fantasy starter. I think I'm kind of treating him as a tight end too with some upside, maybe becomes like a spot start option for us.
Yeah, I don't think that you're getting a full-on Tucker Kraft replacement. I think you're getting Dalton Schultz with more like physical ability and in a better offense.
Fair.
Over to Indy, where Alec Pierce has become relevant in recent weeks, which surprises me, honestly. Season highs in targets, catches, and yards in Sunday's loss to the Steelers, but it was his second game among the past 3 with 10-plus targets, 98-plus yards. What do we expect from Alec Pierce the rest of the way, Jared?
Yeah, he's having a really strong season, which is interesting, too, because he's slated for free agency this offseason. So an interesting dynasty stash, because I would assume he's probably going to depart Indianapolis and end up somewhere else with potentially a bigger role. Like you said, Matt, he has the double-digit targets in 2 of his last 3 games. Other than that, he hasn't topped 5 targets in any of his other 5 games. So he's still not a great volume bet, I don't think, unless, this recent trend continues. I think it's just going to be tough, though, with Michael Pittman there, Tyler Warren, Josh Downs. And then Pierce has this volatile role. He has a 20.5 yard average target depth. 30% of his targets have come 20 plus yards downfield. So he is their downfield guy. When those downfield shots hit, he's going to have a nice fantasy day. When they don't, though, the floor is super low because, again, the volume has not been great. So Pierce is basically Keyshawn Butte. Is the similar role, both in good offenses. If they make plays downfield, they're going to deliver for you. If not, they're going to bust.
Way less fun name, though. So, yeah,
Yes.
he's way more interesting in a non-PPR format where we can take those swings a little bit more easily. He's not going to be as reliable for PPR. I think ultimately Alec Pierce is a bit more interesting than I expected him to be heading into this season, but we don't want to overrate what he is. He's in his 4th season in the league, 2.4 receptions per game for his career to this point. Career high, though, this year at 3.4 catches per game. But, don't overlook that number. 3.4 is not the kind of catches per game number that we can just rely on in our lineups in, typically sized fantasy leagues. Obviously, the deeper your league goes, the more you can stomach a guy that's just going to have wide swings week to week like that. 20 more yards per game this year than last, though, leading the league in yards per catch for the 2nd straight season. So that's just the type of player that he is. Going to give you some boom weeks, going to give you some bust spots. I would expect a little bit more playing from behind for the Colts the rest of the way, just because they've been rather fortunate in that area to this point. That said, their matchups the rest of the way don't get super difficult versus what they've faced so far. They're at the Chiefs in week 12, at the Seahawks in week 15. I think those are 2 potentially trailing spots, maybe at the Jaguars the week before that Seattle game. But just in general, I would guess that the Colts don't play from ahead quite as much as they have to this point.
Yeah, that would help Pierce. Now, unfortunately, the Colts have the toughest remaining wide receiver schedule according to our adjusted fantasy points allowed. So the matchups for him are tough, but I'm with you, Matt. I think we should get more overall passing volume from the Colts than we've gotten so far.
Darius Slayton gave us a little bit more last week than previous. 5 catches, 62 yards against San Francisco. Jared, is he going to matter going forward?
Maybe. I mean, Jackson Dart has made this Giants offense irrelevant. And Slayton has seen pretty nice volume now, even over the last 4 games. 22 total targets over the last 4 games for Slayton, 18.6% target share. He's kind of right there with Theo Johnson as the number 2 target in this passing game behind Wan'Dale Robinson. So even still, though, Slayton 44th among receivers in expected PPR points per game over those 4 games. He's just 68th in actual PPR points. He's had like 2 should have been touchdowns that he just hasn't been able to come down with over the past 3 or 4 games now. So he's, I guess, right there for me with Pierce and Watson, where he's probably going to have a spike week or 2 the rest of the way because of how he's used. I'd probably put him behind Pierce and Watson, though, just because, those offenses are just better. I'd just rather be relying on the Packers and Colts offenses. So I'd have Slayton 3rd on this list in terms of waiver pickups this week. But again, similar profile to Watson and Pierce.
I agree. If I'm looking at those 3 guys, if I need somebody right now to put in a lineup this week or next week, Alec Pierce would be first for me. Christian Watson would be the guy if I'm looking to stash the one that has upside going forward. And then Darius Slayton among the 3 would be like the other 2 got picked up. I'll take Darius Slayton because why not?
Yep, exactly.
Parker Washington looked like he was going to be a PPR factor going forward for us, at least over the next couple weeks or so. 88% playing time the past 2 games amid injuries to his wide receiver teammates in Jacksonville. 9+ targets in each of those games. Had the particularly good game last time out against the Raiders. The Jaguars lost Brian Thomas Jr. to an ankle injury in that game. They lost De'Ami Brown to a concussion in that game, but then they went and traded for Jacoby Myers today as we speak, Tuesday afternoon, Jared. So is Parker Washington now irrelevant, or is he still somebody that we should pay some attention to on waivers for week 10?
Yeah, he's worth stashing. I would have him behind those first 3 guys for now, just with the Myers news. There's just a lot of moving pieces here at this point. Adam Schefter made almost like an offhand report that Brian Thomas has a mild high ankle sprain, but to me, a high ankle sprain is a high ankle sprain. So that's worrisome. I think he could miss time and his performance could be impacted when he does come back. Now, I do think Myers is probably, once he gets up to speed, locked into a every down role in this offense, just what they gave up for him. I mean, 4th and a 6th round pick is not nothing to NFL teams. And just Jacoby Myers' resume, I think Myers and Thomas are going to be the top 2 guys here. Then it's going to be, Parker Washington or De'Ami Brown for that 3rd spot, which is still relevant because the Jags do run so many 3 wide receiver sets. Whoever that 3rd guy is going to be on the field. So I think Washington, again, if you have space, worth stashing just to kind of see how this situation shakes out over the next few weeks. But I think the path is pretty difficult for him to, be a reliable fantasy option for us long term, at least once, some of these other guys get healthy.
Yeah, they traded 2 draft picks for Jacoby Myers. His contract runs out at the end of this season. So clearly they're buying him for right now. They need wide receiver help right now while Travis Hunter's out, while Brian Thomas is dealing with yet another injury. And the Jaguars wide receiver coach is Edgar Bennett, who spent, I believe it was like 6 years with the Raiders right before arriving in Jacksonville this year, which means he was there for the entirety of Jacoby Myers' time before this season with the Raiders. So that should help get Jacoby Myers familiar with the offense pretty quickly. He's a veteran who's played for 2 teams. Jacksonville, like I said, obviously traded for him for immediate help. I don't think that there's going to be a huge ramp-up period, so I would expect that we see plenty of Myers this week, maybe a little bit less this week than we should expect from them going forward. We'll see on that front. I think, that plus the injuries that we already talked about at the position gives Parker Washington room to still be relevant this week. So if I'm looking at all those receivers on the wire now and I need a week 10 option for my PPR team, I like Parker Washington better than any of the other guys that we talked about. I just think there's a better chance that he gets targeted plenty this week. Gives me a usable PPR line. If I'm talking about upside from week 10 on, or especially if I don't need a week 10 option, Parker Washington gets a lot less interesting for me.
Yeah, I think Washington definitely usable this week if Brian Thomas is out. If Thomas plays, I think, Washington becomes shakier for sure. I want to note too with the Jags for all these receivers and even the running backs is that Jacksonville came out of their bye week and had their run heaviest game plan of the season last week. 45.5% neutral pass rate, minus 5.5% pass rate over expected, both season low. So, we'll see if that's a trend or just a one game blip. Just the way Trevor Lawrence has played all year would not surprise me if Liam Cohen wants to lean on that run game a bit more the rest of the way.
I would not be surprised if they did that as well, but it's also worth noting that Trevor Lawrence was very sick during that game. So it's possible that played into it as well. We don't know which of those, if they were both factors, if, we're overrating both sides of that, but either way, it's factors to consider and keep in mind going forward. One more thing for me on Jacoby Myers and Parker Washington. Both of these guys have actually spent a bit more time outside than most people probably realize over the past couple of years. So it's not necessarily slot receiver versus slot receiver here for one spot between Myers and Washington. It's possible that both of these guys land among the top 3. I certainly expected Jacoby Myers to be one of the top 2 wide receivers in Jacksonville the rest of the way this season. And we'll see how soon Travis Hunter's back. I mean, we got optimistic reports today in the wake of the trade saying they don't expect Travis Hunter's injury to be long-term, but we know he's at least out for 3 more games. And I think that you trade for Jacoby Myers, at least in part, because you don't know when Travis Hunter is going to be back.
Yep, exactly. I think it's Washington versus De'Ami Brown for that third receiver spot until Hunter gets back. And once Hunter gets back, assuming he's healthy, I do think it's pretty clearly going to be BTJ, Myers, and Travis Hunter as the top 3 guys. So again, Washington kind of only relevant until Hunter is back, but that is at least 3 more games, like you said, Matt, and could be more time beyond that.
Tory Horton racked up 2 touchdowns against Washington with Cooper Kupp out this weekend, but then Seattle traded for Rashid Shaheed before Tuesday's deadline. So, Jared, are you at all interested in Tory Horton on waivers this week?
I mean, Tory Horton's really good, and I'd be excited if I had him in Dynasty, but I think this kind of kills any chance he has of fantasy value the rest of the way. We heard that Shaheed was like the Seahawks guy. That's who they wanted to get, and it makes sense because he played under Clint Kubiak last year in New Orleans, so knows the offense can come right in, gives him a speed element. This offense has been so good using those play action passes and firing the ball downfield. So Shaheed fits in well there. Even for Shaheed, this is, again, I think it's a good move for Seattle, but this Seahawks offense has been in 11 personnel, so 3 wide receivers on the field for just 36% of their snaps this season, second lowest in the NFL. We know one of those spots is JSN. I still think when Cooper Kupp is healthy, he's going to be out there because they value his run blocking. So I think Horton has basically no chance of reliable fantasy value. Even Shaheed, I think, is going to be tough because he might be a guy who's only playing, 50, 60% of the snaps. Now, he's probably going to be targeted quite heavily when he is out there, but I think it's going to be tricky to, just find snaps for all these wide receivers the rest of the way.
Yeah, we'll see. I mean, currently Cooper Kupp's dealing with 2 lower body issues. He, of course, lost 5+ games to injury each of the past 3 seasons, is getting up there in age. I would imagine that at least Shaheed outscores him fantasy-wise the rest of the way. We'll see about how the playing time breaks down. But for Tory Horton, I agree. I mean, he, even with the 4-catch game against Washington, he's got 13 receptions on the season now. So looks like an intriguing long-term player. I don't really think he's going to be relevant for the rest of 2025.
Agreed. And Yoshihide only helps Sam Darnold continue to, be a potential QB1 for us.
For sure. Another rookie in Chicago had a big game against the Bengals. It was Colston Loveland, the tight end that they drafted in the first round. Jared, how hard are we going after him following that big game against the Bengals?
Yeah, I think we saved the top waiver target of the week for last year. I think Loveland will be the guy I'd be most aggressive going to get on waiver wires this week. Now, the big game came against Cincinnati, who has been the worst tight end defense in the NFL in a just wacky football game, right? So like there are definitely some caveats here, but I think this breakout is real. This is a super talented player, got the high draft capital, has a path to targets in Chicago. Like Rome Odunze is still the number one receiver there, but he's cooled off. DJ Moore has been disappointing. Then it's, Olamide Zaccheaus and whatever Luther Burden's going to give them. So I think there's a path for Loveland to be the number 2 target in this passing game the rest of the way. The schedule is fine, kind of middle of the pack in terms of adjusted points allowed to tight ends. 1+ matchup against the Steelers in week 12. There's a tough matchup against the Eagles in week 13. Otherwise, it's a bunch of neutral matchups. So I think Loveland can be a top 12 fantasy tight end going forward.
And we've talked about the slot being important in Ben Johnson's offense. Obviously, Colston Loveland's a tight end, but can do plenty of that slot stuff. We saw Sam Laporta do big stuff production-wise for Ben Johnson in Detroit. So, yeah, when you factor in that the Bears drafted Colston Loveland in the first round ahead of Tyler Warren and with Cole Kmet already on the roster, it makes it a lot easier to believe it's a for real breakout as opposed to just, a game where he happened to find opportunities. So I'm certainly willing to buy into that breakout possibility, especially when it's at a position where we've talked about before. It's a lot easier to, just get by with a guy who's averaging 3 to 4 catches per week. If that's all we get from Loveland going forward, we've got the physical ability to turn that into more. And, we'll see what Ben Johnson does with him. So I agree. Top guy among all of the options on waivers that we've talked about so far. But let's close it out now with some defenses. And of course, first we'll look at week 10. Who's your favorite defense to stream for week 10 from waivers?
Yeah, we'll keep picking on the usual suspects as far as offenses go. The Browns this week get the Jets. The Browns are actually 2.5-point favorites in this game now. That line moved after the Jets traded 2 of their best players on defense. So you get the Browns as favorites. The Jets implied for 17.5 points. The Jets have been the 3rd best matchup for opposing defenses this season, according to our adjusted points allowed, assuming Justin Fields is going to be in there, which I think you'll want if you're going to start the Browns defense. But even if they go back to Tyrod Taylor, the Browns would still be a strong play.
Yeah, Taylor's still a threat for sacks and, can certainly turn the ball over. So no matter who the quarterback is, I agree. Cleveland would be my top target among streaming defenses this week. Some others out there, you can check our week 10 rankings to see who's available in your league, or the free agent finder, of course, can help you with that as well. Week 11, Jared, I'm looking at Atlanta, who doesn't have a good matchup this week, so we're not going to be picking them up necessarily for that one. But if you want to get ahead, pick them up ahead of week 11 when they've got a matchup with Carolina, which is the 5th best DST scoring matchup for week 11. I mean, the Panthers just can't score that many points in general. So we're going to assume that this matchup goes a lot differently than the first Atlanta-Carolina matchup went this year, which even that game, even though it included a bunch of points for the Panthers, still found them short of 300 total yards. So it was not really it wasn't a matter of the Panthers offense delivering in that game. It was just an oddball game. The Atlanta defense has been good overall. I'll bet on them against Carolina in this matchup. And even beyond this one, if you grab Atlanta for that week 11 spot, you can keep them for week 12 at New Orleans, then week 13 at the Jets. Might even be worth saving beyond that, even if just for a week 16 visit to Arizona, because I think once we get to fantasy playoff time, it's even easier to shed a backup wide receiver or a handcuff running back type and stash a second defense to make sure that you're set up for weekly matchups.
Yeah, I like that stretch for Atlanta. I like Atlanta as like the floor play on defense for week 11. I don't see the Panthers scoring a bunch of points in that game. If you wanted a riskier play for week 11 with some more upside, I do think the Bears are worth considering against Minnesota. The Bears, not a good defense, but they've continued to force a bunch of turnovers, and JJ McCarthy played better in Detroit last week, getting that upset win, but I think he's still a pretty big question mark. And if the Bears do get out to a lead in that game, I think there's definitely upside for that defense.
Yeah, and the Bears, of course, we saw most recently give up a ton of points to the Bengals. That's what they are. They're not a good defense, but they have forced a good number of turnovers. So boom bust. At some point, that's what you're looking for. It's some defense with the boom potential, even though you know that the bust potential is there.
Exactly.
Head to draftsharks.com now to find more streaming defense options for this week and beyond, along with other waiver wire targets for week 10 or week 11, or even just the rest of the season. We set up the free agent finder to help you with any of those pursuits, no matter what position it is that you need. Check the show notes below for links to our articles covering offense, streaming defenses, and even IDP waiver targets, loaded with D-line options this week if you need a defensive lineman for your IDP lineup for week 10. No matter how you play or what you need, Draft Sharks is your unfair advantage.